welcome back to Flipped Classroom Training with the Illinois Flipped and Blended Learning Network. Now, what we're going to talk about now is intentional content. Now, we all as teachers have content that we have to convey. We all have goals that we have to meet, whether they be district goals, state goals, broader college readiness goals. We have a number of goals and a number of stakeholders that want us to put all of these things into that box that is our classroom. So to get everything to fit, we have to do it with thought and with order. And when those things don't fit in the box, we get very upset. Let's see what the flipped classroom can do to help us put all the things in the classroom that need to fit into the classroom and do so in a way that makes sense for students, makes sense for teachers, and makes sense in terms of learning. So, intentional content. Intentional content is all of the items and all of the things that are spread out before you as the teacher that we're going to choose, that we say, this is good for students. This over here, this also is good for students. And we start taking pieces and we start piling them up. And before long, our stack gets fairly large. Now, traditionally, we go down to the giant 3-hole punch, and we take the stack and go, and we put 3-hole punch in it. We say, put it in your binders, and we start on page 1, and we move through it in class the remainder of the year. There's another way. Remember our independent space and our group space. We may still have the entire space of the classroom and all these things that we've put together for students, but they don't necessarily have to happen now all in that group space. What we need to do, take it out of the 3-ring binder once we've gathered all the things we think we'd like, and let's now divide them up. Which of these can go to the individual, and which of these things can go into the group? Now, what we'll find is when we start thinking outside the rules of the box, the intentional content we come up with may start to get very different. At some point we may say, I think after this many activities, I need to know where the students are. In a traditional classroom, that means spending a whole day on a quiz, or even the first part of a class on the quiz, then maybe looking at that quiz, and maybe it's another day before they get it back. Alternatively, we now have online tools where you can get quiz information. You can get formative information from students without ever them coming to class. In fact, blended learning is based on part of this when you start talking about blended as an official hybrid of learning. So what you may find is this quiz that I had intended to give during this day and it took up this X number of class time can now go home with the student and be done previously, and I get the results based on a digital grade. And that grade may or may not make it to the grade book. It may simply be a check mark or a waypoint on their learning path. In fact, 9 times out of 10, that's the most effective way to take quiz information, is to use it as a waypoint on the way to learning in a formative sense rather than a summative sense. So we need to take all this content and we need to now put it into the boxes. And you say, well, before long I have stuff scattered all over. That's why the content needs to be intentional. What are you giving to the student to have, learn, or do? First question, where is it best accomplished? In the group space or in the individual space? The second question is, what do we want to accomplish with it? Do we want it to be formative? Do we want it to be summative? The next thing we ask is, do we do it in a traditional in-class method, or is there another way that we can make whatever this activity is happen? And what we find is we have lots more choices in a flipped environment. Here's what I use. I use what are called digital instruction blocks. Now, digital instruction blocks are things that I can put into a digital framework. I tend to use a simple drawing, and that drawing has little icons on it, and each icon is an activity or set of activities for the students. Some of those individual learning activities happen at home. Some of them happen in the group space. But that's how I guide the framework of my learning, is I use digital instruction blocks. Now, let me give you an example of a digital instruction block. If I were giving most digital instruction blocks to my students, they have some sort of opener. That opener is usually a short introductory instructional video, much like we're doing here. And the student will watch that outside of class. There are times they watch it inside of class, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But they can watch it outside of class. Then they have their couple practice exercises or practice activities. I'm getting even away from practice exercises in a traditional sense and using programs like GeoGebra or other online learning tools to be activities to prove to me that the students are making progress toward their learning. Those things could be online quizzes for you. They could be videos with interactive elements in them, like an Ed puzzle. They could be a Quizlet. They could be flashcards. They could simply be a question that they come up with based on the information using a whisk method. So, when we have the instruction, then we have some sort of waypoint for learning. Now we can move on and maybe we put another activity in. In the English classroom, it's easy for the intentional content to have questions with the reading right there. And you can put your interactive elements on one side of the page and you can put the text on the other side of the page as a guided reading. Maybe it's an interactive notebook that you use so that part of the elements are digital, part of the elements are written. But in all things, there's a digital place where the student can go to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that they can get the content that you intend them to learn. Now, that's in the home sense. In the classroom sense, the digital instruction blocks work the same way. If there is a group activity, it's easy to put a box on my sheet of all the activities that students do that gives them instructions and how to do it, or tips, or examples, or student-produced work from a previous iteration of the project. All of those things can be put into one digital instruction block. It's not necessarily me making a video telling them information and definitions about the Pythagorean theorem, but it is something that they can access digitally, individually, or as a group to complete their group assignment. So that's another way that you can use digital instruction blocks within the classroom to make the content that you're going to give students intentional. And remember, our goal is to get them those things that the state, the district, college readiness requires, but it does not say that we have to do it within a traditional format. The nice thing about the flipped format is that we can take those digital pieces of information and we can put them elsewhere. We can put them in different times in different places. They can be accessed from the volleyball bus. They can be accessed with parents at home so that parents also know how to work and help their child. These are all things that are classroom content, but then can be worked on outside of our classroom because now they have access, not just to a book, but to us, either visually, verbally, in text, or through email or other digital media. So the content that we put in our classroom has to be intentional, and for the teacher, it ends up being a little bit more than we're used to, because not only do we have to find the activity and put it into our large binder, we now have to figure out where best does it fit, in the individual space or in the group space. How can it best be delivered that students have access to it? And what is the most productive way to do whatever the activity is? And what you'll find is when you break outside the four walls of the classroom, a whole world of intentional content wakes up for you. So, we'll go on to the next step. That's the professional education. So, see you in a minute.